Roosevelt, do solemnly swear.
I, Dwight D. Eisenhower, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution.
The Constitution of the United States. So help me God.
Don't you love it? Thank you for joining me on Contemplating the Constitution. I'm Mark David Smith. Last week, I gave you my research on Article 1, Section 10, Clause 2, called the Import-Export Clause. Lord, we ask that our governmental leaders would be God-fearing and recognize that they are accountable to you for each decision and act. This week, I give you my research on the last of the articles dealing with the legislative branch of the United States government in the Constitution. Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3 states, no state shall, without the consent of Congress, lay any duty of tonnage, keep troops or ships of war in times of peace, enter into any agreement or compact with another state or with a foreign power, or engage in war, unless actually invaded, or in such imminent danger as will not admit of delay. The first passage is more commonly called the States and Duty of Tonnage Clause. The second part is called the States and Military Affairs Clause. And the third part is called the Compacts Clause. If you're a longtime listener or follower of the show, you'll recognize that most of what I read, almost all of those items are somewhere in the past sections of Article 1. As we enter into the last section of Article 1, we notice that Section 10 makes sure all these past line items have been covered in full array. The first part of Clause 3 says, no state shall, without the consent of Congress, lay any duty of tonnage in writing. In writing the tonnage clause, the framers recognized that if the states had been left free to tax, the privilege of access to their harbors by vessels, the prohibition against duties on imports and exports in Article 1, Section 10, Clause 2 could have been nullified by taxing the vessels transporting the merchandise. The prohibition against tonnage duties embraces all taxes and duties, regardless of their name or form, whether measured by the tonnage of the vessel or not. In effect, these are charges for the privilege of entering, trading in, or lying in a port. The Tonnage Clause does not ban all taxes which fall on vessels that use a state's port, harbor, or other waterways. Such a radical proposition would transform the Tonnage Clause from one that protects vessels and their owners from discrimination by seaboard states to one that gives vessels preferential treatment with regard to all other property and its owners in a seaboard state. The Tonnage Clause does not extend to charges made by state authority, even if graduated according to tonnage for services rendered to the vessel, such as the action or business of piloting, towage, charges for loading and unloading cargoes, accommodations provided by a wharf for the loading or unloading, or storage. For the purpose of determining accommodation charges, it is immaterial whether the wharf was built by the state or a municipal corporation or an individual. A state may not levy a tonnage duty to defray the expenses of a quarantine system, but it may exact a fixed fee for examination of all vessels passing quarantine. A state license fee for ferrying on a navigable river is not a tonnage tax. but rather a proper exercise of the police power, and the fact that a vessel is enrolled under federal law does not exempt it. The second part of Clause 3 says, no state without the consent of Congress shall keep troops or ships of war in times of peace, known as the States and Military Affairs Clause. Concerning a state's military power, this provision contemplates the use of individual state military power to put down an armed insurrection too strong to be controlled by civil authority, and the organization and maintenance of an active state militia. This is not a keeping of troops in time of war within the prohibition of this clause. The third part of the clause says no state shall, without the consent of Congress, enter into any agreement or compact with another state or with a foreign power, or engage in war unless actually invaded or in such imminent danger as will not admit of delay, known as the Compact Clause. Except for the single limitation that the consent of Congress must be obtained, the original inherent sovereign rights of the states to make compacts with each other was not surrendered under the Constitution. The compact, as the Supreme Court has put it, adapts to our union of sovereign states. It is the age-old treaty-making power of independent sovereign nations. In American history, the compact technique can be tracked to the numerous controversies that arose over the ill-defined boundaries of the original colonies. These disputes were usually resolved by negotiation, with the resulting agreement subject to approval by the Crown. When the political ties with Britain were broken, the Articles of Confederation provided for appeal to Congress in all disputes between two or more states over boundaries or any cause whatever, but required the approval of Congress for any treaty confederation, or alliance to which a state should be a party. The framers of the Constitution went further. By the first clause of this section, the Import-Export Clause, they laid down an unqualified prohibition against any treaty, alliance, or confederation. And by the third clause, which is this one, the Tonnage Clause, they required the consent of Congress for any agreement or compact. The significance of this distinction was pointed out by Chief Justice Taney. He was the fifth Chief Justice of the United States, holding office from 1836 until 1864. He said, and I quote, "As these words, agreement and compact, could not have been idly or superfluously used by the framers of the Constitution, they cannot be construed to mean the same thing with the word treaty. They evidently mean something more and were designed to make the prohibition more comprehensive. The word agreement does not necessarily import any direct and express stipulation, nor is it necessary that it should be in writing. If there is a verbal understanding to which both parties have assented and upon which both are acting, it is an agreement." And the use of all these terms, treaty, agreement, and compact, show that it was the intention of the framers of the Constitution to use the broadest and most comprehensive terms, and that they anxiously desired to cut off all connection or communication between a state and a foreign power. We shall fail to execute that evident intention unless we give the word agreement its most extended signification. So apply it as to prohibit every agreement, written or verbal, formal or informal, positive or implied, by the mutual understanding of the parties, end quote. But more than 50 years later, in Virginia versus Tennessee, the court shifted position, holding that the unqualified prohibition of compacts and agreements between states without the consent of Congress did not apply to agreements concerning such minor matters as adjustments of boundaries, which have no tendency to increase the political powers of the contracting states or to encroach upon just supremacy of the United States. Accordingly, congressional approval of a compact is needed when the agreement might affect injuriously the interests of other states, or when the compact would infringe on the rights of the national government. For many years after the Constitution was adopted, boundary disputes continued to predominate as the subject matter of agreements among the states. Since the turn of the 20th century, however, the Interstate Compact has been used as an instrument for state cooperation in carrying out affirmative programs for solving common problems. So now let's take a look at the consent of Congress. I've mentioned it several times during my research, but of course it's right there in the actual clause that none of this can happen. And of course, what we're seeing here, all of these last, this section 10, clause 1, 2, and 3, all have to do with the states. And this one specifically talking about how the states have to deal not only with each other, but deal with the new Congress, the new government that's being set up, but how they cannot within themselves, by themselves, individually deal with foreign powers. It all has, all of that, whether you're dealing with other states or anything, it has to be through the consent of Congress. You have to, even your tariffs and your duties and all of that has to be run through Congress, and it has to be set up on a national basis. You can't, as any one state, have a jurisdiction or a better law or deal with people coming into your ports. You can't offer this even without all the states having equal ability to do this. So talking about the consent of Congress, the Constitution makes no provision with regard to the time when the consent of Congress shall be given, or the mode or form by which it shall be signified. While the consent will usually precede the compact or agreement, it may not be given until its nature is fully developed. The consent of Congress may be granted conditionally upon terms appropriate to the subject and bypassing no constitutional limitations. Congress does not, by giving its consent to a compact, relinquish or restrict any of its own powers. There you have my research on Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3. Once again, like I said before, this is the last of the legislative procedures within the Constitution. And we will be going on to Article 2 next week. My base research comes from a couple of articles found on the internet. Number one is Wikipedia, titled Roger B. Taney. Then 3 articles are from Constitution Annotated website, titled States and Duty of Tonnage, the States and Military Affairs, and Compacts Clause. You can find the details of these references on the MessianicLambNetwork.com website. Next week, I'll give my research on Article 2, Section 1, Clause 1, which reads, The executive power shall be vested in the President of the United States of America. He shall hold his office during the term of 4 years, and together with the Vice President, chosen for the same term, be elected as follows. Each state shall appoint, in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct, a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state shall be entitled in the Congress. But no senator or representative or person holding an office of trust or profit under the United States shall be appointed an elector. I'm Mark David Smith, and I'm your host for the Lamb original show, Lamb Network original show, Contemplating the Constitution. Thank you very much for joining me this week, and check out the Messianic Lamb Network website. We're pushing close to 1,500 videos now that are accessible through the website, and we're even putting together some new shows. So stay tuned as we plug on. We're here at the middle end of next month. We are going into our 9th year broadcasting through the Lamb Network. And so we're excited about that. We got a lot of things ahead for you, and doing some planning. So stay tuned. You're only going to find out through the website. So check back at the website often and see what we're going. There's even a page called New that will show you all the updated things. Anything new that we're bringing in, you're going to see it on this page. So there you go. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Contemplating the Constitution. I'm Mark David Smith. Have a great week.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hoogie, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.
Eleanor Roosevelt, do solemnly swear.
I, Dwight D. Eisenhower, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
Constitution.
The Constitution of the United States. So help me God.